All right, so today what we're doing is we're starting with the next spread in chapter 8, which is 8C, looking at how are the different ways we measure consciousness? What are the different devices or the equipment or the technology that we use to measure or to try to understand what state of consciousness a person is currently in? Okay, so today we're going to learn about a few different devices, and we're also going to learn about subjective ways in which we can report a person can report their consciousness as well. So we're going to learn about physiological measurements as well as objective and subjective measurements. So this is kind of like a summary. This is kind of like a summary of what we're going to go through today. So these are the methods used to study consciousness. Okay, so we're going to learn about what an EEG is, electroencephalograph, what an EMG is, which is an electromyograph, EOG, an electrooculograph, as well as a few of our subjective measurements. So we're going to learn about video monitoring, we're going to learn about sleep diaries, and we're going to learn about how we can measure speed and accuracy on cognitive tasks as a way of determining someone's consciousness there. Okay, so for physiological methods, so for EEG, EMG, and EOG, we're going to learn more about them in the next few slides. There's a special memory tip here. We'll come back to this when we cover those three physiological methods there. So the first one is electroencephalograph. So an electroencephalograph, what it does is it basically allows for a representation of a person's brain waves. As we're going to learn about in the next spread, brain waves are actually a really good way to see which specific state of consciousness a person is in, because when you're awake and you're alert and you're aware and you're just doing some work, the kind of brain waves that are being produced in your brain are basically different from the brain waves that you see when you're drowsy or when you're daydreaming or when you're asleep. Okay, so there are different brain waves that we see there, and they're different brainwave patterns. And we're going to learn about the 4 types of brainwaves in spread 8D. But for now, we don't need to know what the brainwaves are. We just need to know that the electroencephalograph is this device. And as I said in the previous slide, we use this memory tip, DARE, D-A-R-E. It's a device that detects, so D, amplifies, which means makes bigger. R means record, and E means electrical activity, okay, or electrical nature of that activity. Okay, we know brainwaves are electrical in nature, and we said neurotransmitters tend to be chemical in nature, okay? We learned about this in Unit 3. Brainwaves, neural connections, all of these things have an electrical nature to them. Okay, so that's why we say electrical activity there. So basically what happens, guys, is when a person is hooked up to an EEG, all these little electrodes are kind of put on their head. So you can see a picture of that in this image here. Okay, all these little wires with electrodes on them are clipped onto the person's scalp. Okay, as close to the scalp as you can get, as well as the sides of the head. And what they do is they actually detect brainwave activity, and they actually amplify that activity onto a screen. You might have seen this in some movies and stuff when they're looking at a person's brain scan and that kind of stuff. Okay, the name of the readout that you get from this person's, being hooked up to all those electrodes is called an electroencephalogram. So I can literally take this and print it out on a piece of paper and analyze it further. Okay, that is an electroencephalogram. Now, the device that's used, the actual device that's used with the electrodes is called an electroencephalograph. So don't get confused between the two terminologies there. Okay, in the same way, a telegram, remember a telegram is like the olden way they used to send messages to each other. Just think of it that way. Telegram, electroencephalogram. That's the actual paper readout that you can print out. The electroencephalograph is the actual equipment. Okay, so that's the difference between the two. An issue with using EEGs is that, again, EEGs are quite finicky and quite fussy. You've got to put all these electrodes on this person's head. It can be a little bit time consuming. For people who wear head coverings like turbans or headscarves or hijabs or whatever, okay, it can actually not detect, even for people who have really thick hair, the electrodes, if they're not close enough to the scalp and they're not like clipped in close enough to the scalp, what it can lead to is a poor reading of those brain waves. Okay, so generally those are some limitations. Other limitations are EEGs don't give us detailed information about brain function. Okay, so I can't really see how this person's brain is changing, brainwaves are changing as they're doing something. Okay, remember last year when we learned about functional neuroimaging techniques versus structural, and we said functional are better because you can see, like when a person listens to music, how the brainwaves are changing, or when a person does a task, how the brainwaves change. The problem with EEGs is they don't allow for that to happen. Okay, so that's basically the main limitation of an electroencephalograph there. So the main thing we got to take away from this slide is EEGs give us an idea of electrical activity in the brain in the form of brain waves. Okay, so that's the EEG there. And you might be thinking, oh my God, electroencephalograph, like it's such a big word. Do I need to be able to spell it? Vika have said that they're happy for you guys to use abbreviations. However, having said that, I think it is important to know what EEG stands for. Even if you're not good with spelling it 100%, at least have a basic idea of what this word looks like. If you get this in a multiple choice without the EEG abbreviation, you need to know that this means this, if that makes sense, okay? So don't worry about the spelling it correctly, but just be able to at least have an idea that this abbreviation corresponds to this word, okay? So that's important. And that applies to all of the electromyograph, electrooculograph as well. You can just use the abbreviations there. Okay, so having said that, moving on to the next physiological or biological way that we can measure a person's consciousness, we're looking at a device called the electromyograph. Now, I've underlined the word M because the electromyograph actually detects, amplifies, again, the same memory chip, DARE, detects, amplifies means makes bigger, so it can be read out on a screen, records, so it records it, so you can also, again, print this kind of readout out, electrical activity in the muscles. Okay, that's where the M comes from. Electromyograph, or EMG, basically detects, amplifies, and records electrical activity in the muscles. So obviously, because it's in the muscles, it is to do with M for movement. Okay, so what you might be thinking, okay, why would we measure someone's movement? Obviously, when a person's conscious, they're going to be moving. But it's not just about measuring someone's state of consciousness, but also measuring whether a person is unconscious or whether a person has moved into an altered state of consciousness. Okay, for example, we know that when someone's asleep, that can actually lead to less muscle movement in certain stages of sleep, okay? A person moves a lot when they're first falling into sleep, when they first hit the bed, when they first hit their pillow, they're moving a lot. But as the night goes on, they're moving less and less, okay? At some point of the night, and we're going to learn about the types of sleep in the next chapter, at some point of the night, you go through a type of sleep called REM sleep, where you literally look paralyzed. You're not moving at all. You've got very little muscle movement there, okay? So in that kind of a stage, the EMG would show literally little to no activity there, okay? But during our normal waking consciousness, when we're awake and we're alert, okay, in the early stages of sleep where we're still tossing and turning in bed, if we were to be hooked up to an EMG and those electrodes of the EMG are put onto our muscles, like our arms or our legs or whatever, there'd be a lot of activity in that device, okay? We say high activity in the EMG reading. Okay, so that's basically showing you that the EMG is about recording that electrical activity in your muscles in the form of muscle movement. Okay, this is not just voluntary movement as well, it can be involuntary as well. So for example, a lot of the time when you're first falling asleep, sometimes your leg does that weird thing where it just kicks out and you can't even control that. That's called an involuntary muscle spasm. Okay, and that happens involuntarily. And if you were to have been hooked up to an electromyograph at that time, that would automatically record this sudden burst of high activity that just came out of nowhere. Okay, so the electromyograph, it's important to understand that it is used to detect voluntary movement, so movement that you initiate yourself, that you control, as well as involuntary movement. And involuntary movement is more the movement we see when we're asleep. Okay, obviously when we're asleep, in the previous spread, we said we have a lack of self-control over our physical behaviors and movements. So when we're asleep, we don't have the same level of control over our movements or our muscles compared to when we're awake. Because that's why sometimes people accidentally kick other people that they're sleeping with, or they might accidentally, their arms might just flail out like that, and they don't just stay in one specific position or movement there, and they keep moving out throughout the night. Okay, so that's basically the electromyograph. So remember, electroencephalograph is for brainwave activity, electromyograph is for muscle activity. And the third physiological measurement that we look at is called the electrooculograph. Okay, the electrooculograph is abbreviated as EOG. Okay, now you can remember that this is for the eyes, or that this is for the muscle movement in the eyes, because O kind of looks like an eye, but also O stands for a lot of things that we tend to associate with eyes, like ocular, okay, which is related to vision, optometrist, which is the person that you go to when you want to check if your eyes are okay. Okay, so you can remember it like that. So EOG is basically detecting. Hold on. Optometrist. Okay. The EOG is detecting, amplifying, recording electrical activity in the muscles around your eyes. Okay. Again, we're using that same memory tip DARE that we talked about in the last few slides as well. That's why I keep repeating it, because this, if you don't write detect, amplifies, and records electrical activity, you won't get the full mark for this definition. Okay. That's why we have to be really strict with remembering this memory tip. Now, in the SAC or in the exam, if you were to write electrical activity in the eye, that would be wrong. You always need to specify it's the electrical activity in the muscles around the eyes, okay? Your eyes themselves don't move. It's actually the muscles in your eyes that cause your eyes to move. In the same way the muscles in your arm allow your arm to move, the muscles in your eye allow your eyes to move. So you have to be really specific with this. And Vika are very pedantic and very kind of nitpicky about this kind of stuff. Okay, so muscles around your eyes. That's why I've not just bolded it, I've underlined it as well. So you really need to be careful with this. If you write in the SAC, electrooculograph measures or detects, amplifies, and records electrical activity in the eyes, that's wrong. You don't get a mark there. So be careful, okay? Write muscles around the eyes. Okay, so it's the same concept, guys. We're again dealing with electrodes here or wires. The wires are hooked. You can see we're not putting the actual wire into the person's eye. We're putting it into the muscles around the eyes. Even here, you can see with this guy, his eye is here, and he's got the electrodes being placed in different positions around the eye. Same thing in the cartoon image here. You've got the eye is here, but the electrodes are placed around the eye, okay, at the specific points where the eye muscles would twitch or would move. And in the same way that the other two readings for the EEG and the EMG can be put onto a screen, the EOG readings of the muscle activity around the eye can also be amplified and then recorded onto a screen, which can then also be printed out onto a piece of paper. Okay, so it's the same kind of concept with each of these three physiological measurements, or the 3E measurements, we could call them. It's just a matter of understanding which body part each one is responsible for, and basically what each one measures or what each one could help us to measure. Now, measuring eye activity is important because obviously when we're awake and alert and aware, we've got our eyes nice and open like this, but when we're asleep, this is not the case anymore. When we're asleep, our eyes are closed, and it's not going to make a lot of sense now because we haven't covered the sleep chapter yet, but we're actually going to learn about two types of sleep in the next chapter, which are REM sleep. REM stands for rapid eye movement sleep. That's when there's a lot of activity in your eye. So your eyes keep rolling side to side, back and forth. Okay. And NREM sleep. NREM sleep is when there's very low activity in your eye. So your eyes barely roll or barely move around a lot. Okay, we're talking about after you've closed your eyes, by the way. You don't have your eyes open when you sleep, obviously. But after you've closed your eyes in rapid eye movement sleep, your eyes are kind of rolling back and forth. And I'll show you guys what this looks like when we start this chapter on Friday. Okay, so that's basically, the two types of sleep. So obviously, if you're in a rapid eye movement sleep, as the name suggests, you're going to have high activity if you were hooked up to that EOG. If you're in non-rapid eye movement sleep, as the name again suggests, you don't have much rapid eye movement there, you're going to show low activity on an EMG. Okay, that's how we describe the activity on each of these devices. Is it high activity on the EEG, or high activity on the EMG, or high activity on the EOG, or is it low activity? Okay, so is it high or is it low? And again, there's no clear-cut answer. It depends on the situation that we're dealing with there. Okay, or the scenario that we're dealing with. Okay, that's the 3E measurements done. So basically what we've done so far is we've ticked off the three physiological measurements, we would say. So we've done that one, done that one, done that one. Those are our physiological measurements, or the biological measurements for trying to understand what state of consciousness a person is in. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the next one, which is basically our measurement of speed and accuracy on cognitive tasks. Now, what this means is that to understand someone's level of consciousness, I can make them do a cognitive task or an academic task or a test or a quiz or something that basically tests their ability to do something, okay? Obviously, cognitive means with the aid of their brain there, okay? So measurement of speed is basically reaction time. Now, you would know if you are quite athletic, or if you, you know, maybe didn't have proper sleep the night before a sports day and you were, you know, asked to run, you would obviously know that when you are not having proper sleep, when you're sleep deprived, you know, you're in a normal waking consciousness, obviously on the outside, but internally that sleep deprivation has wreaked havoc on your performance, and your reaction time might actually be slower than normal. Okay, so if someone like punches you, you might, or tries to punch you, you might not really dodge that punch as quick as you might have if you had a proper sleep the night before. Okay, so measurement of speed on cognitive tasks is measured by reaction time. Okay, so that's basically how long it takes you to do something or to respond to something. The measurement of accuracy basically involves how many correct responses you can have. So if you guys are, for example, daydreaming in class, and then I'm like, okay, guys, pop quiz. And then I give you like a 5-question quiz and I mark that quiz. If I can see how many correct and incorrect responses each of you made on that task, I can then make a judgment of who was daydreaming and who was actually paying attention. So let's say the daydreaming student, all right, DD, could have maybe got 5 out of 10 on that quiz, whereas the person who was actually paying attention, so A, attention and focus, AF, okay, that could be maybe 8 out of 10. So now I know from this scenario that this person who was paying attention and putting a lot of focus into the lesson, and who wasn't daydreaming or wasn't in an altered state of consciousness, has scored higher. They've had better accuracy, more accuracy in their performance on this task that I gave you, on this quiz that I gave you, compared to someone who was daydreaming, who only got 5 out of 10. Okay, so that gives us an idea of how someone performs in a normal waking state, okay, compared to an altered state. Okay, now measurement of speed and accuracy are important because generally, and we're going to learn more about this when we start the sleep chapter next week, on chapter 9. Basically, the more sleep deprived you are, generally the lower your speed will be on certain tasks, or the longer it will take you to react, and the lower your accuracy will be, which means that you will make more errors or more mistakes. Okay, and this is why we say you should never pull an all-nighter before an exam or SAC, because you might think that it's good for you and you're getting more study time, but actually it's going to cause you to make more silly mistakes and lower that accuracy there in terms of your performance. Okay, so that's the difference between measurement of speed, which is to do with reaction time, and measurement of accuracy, which is to do with how many answers you get correct or incorrect on a specific task. Okay, so that's the cognitive, those are kind of like our cognitive measurements of consciousness, we could say. Okay, subjective reporting of consciousness, basically subjective. Can anyone in the chat box, maybe if you remember from research methods or from other places we've heard about this word, what do you think subjective means? Or give me one word that you think best describes the word subjective, or 1 or 2 words, whatever. Yep, opinion-based or based on the individual person's kind of judgment. Yeah, that's good. So we could say it's kind of individually, we're at individual, and it's different. Okay, so it's different across the individual, and it really depends on how you show your opinion, okay, or show your judgment. In general, most subjective reportings are different across individuals. Okay, they're not the same. So a really common example we've been learning about since last year are self-reports. Okay, if I get everyone to you know, do a survey or something, all of you might have different responses because all of you might have different opinions on e-learning or on homework or on VCE. Okay, whatever issue the self-report or the survey is about, all of you will have different opinions because we all have different judgments and perceptions. Okay, similarly, subjective reporting of consciousness basically means we're talking about video monitoring, and we're talking about sleep diaries. Okay, these are two methods of reporting consciousness that are not as physiological or not as objective as EEG, EOG, EMG, or even the cognitive ones that we just looked at in terms of speed and accuracy. The reason is the individual can affect these. Okay, so these are affected by the person. If I can quickly write that down. So these are affected by the person. What does that mean? Now, if I'm talking about video monitoring, in video monitoring, basically what happens is you've got a person watching this person sleep, and it's usually in a sleep lab. Okay, so in the sleep lab, this person is watching, the researcher is watching this person sleep. Okay, and basically it's subjective because when I'm watching someone sleep, I bring my own personal judgment to what they're doing. If they move a little bit while they're sleeping, maybe they're just tossing and turning in bed. But as the researcher, you might analyze or perceive that as being an abnormal movement. Okay, so remember, not everyone sees the same thing in the same way. That's the basic idea. And that's why video monitoring is a subjective report. Okay, so not everyone will make judgments or will analyze the same video recording of someone being asleep in the same way. Okay, we bring our own judgments, we bring our own personal things. What I see as a normal behavior, when you view the same video, you might not view that as normal behavior. You might be like, no, I don't think it's normal for the person to move like that when they sleep. How did you not pick up on that? Okay, so that's why video monitoring is subjective. Okay, and video monitoring is really good for, and again, this is related to sleep. We'll learn more about this in chapter 10. Sleep disorders, okay, sleep issues like sleepwalking, okay, erratic sleep movements, sleep talking. All of these things are good for, good to analyze using video monitoring. Okay, they're easy to analyze using video monitoring there. Okay, because you can visually see the person getting out of bed, getting ready to do their sleepwalk or whatever it is. Sleep diaries are basically just like a sleep journal. Okay, they're an example of a self-report. And that's why they're subjective, because obviously I can lie. I might have had 2 hours of sleep on Monday night, but I report having 9 hours of sleep. Okay, so I can lie on this and I can give false information about my sleep patterns, okay, or even my waking activities. Usually in a sleep diary, there are also questions like, did you drink any coffee? Okay, I might say no, but actually I did drink coffee. I drank 6 cups that day, but I don't want to show my researcher that I did that, because then they'll be like, oh my God, do you have no self-control? Like, don't you want to sleep better? Okay, so obviously people will lie on this to make themselves look better to the researcher, or to basically hide the fact that they're not sleeping to the schedule that they've been prescribed or that they've been advised to. All right, that's the two subjective reporting of consciousness. Remember, again, I'm stressing about this word subjective. It means that the person influences the final interpretation there, okay? And it's not objective, and there is room for bias in the same way that the person will interpret that differently, or the way that you manipulate your sleep diary can be different as well. Okay, that's basically the two subjective reporting methods for consciousness. Okay, so that's 8C done. So we're just gonna, 8D is pretty short, so I'll just cover 8D and then that'll wrap up chapter 8 for us today. Okay, so we'll just, we're gonna move on to 8D. So 8D covers some of the topics we looked at in 8C, just mainly looking at alertness. We're looking at the 4 types of brainwaves that I talked about at the beginning. And we're just gonna learn about 2 types of drugs, because we know that from last week when we started chapter 8, that one type of altered state of consciousness a person can go into is a drug-induced ASC, or an altered state of consciousness, ASC, that is brought on by the consumption or by the ingestion of some drug there. Okay, and we're going to learn about 2 types of drug. The first one is called stimulant drugs, and the second one is called depressant drugs. So that's literally this chapter. So we already looked at what a brainwave is with reference to the EEG. Okay, that's the first physiological measurement we looked at today. The EEG is a physiological way that we detect, amplify, record electrical activity of the brain, okay, in the form of brain waves. So whatever information you get on the screen when a person is connected to an EEG, that is called a brain wave or a brainwave pattern. Okay, a brainwave is literally just, again, a pattern of electrical current, okay? It's a pattern of electrical current that comes up as neurons communicate with one another. So like I said before, this is all still connected to neural connections and neural communication, okay? We just represent it as a wave, and the different waves have different characteristics. As you can see, alpha here looks a little bit different from beta, in the same way that theta looks similar to, but not the same as delta, okay? So brainwaves vary in terms of their frequency, okay? Frequency means brainwaves per second, and they also vary in terms of their amplitude, which is the height of the brainwave. Now, when we're looking at, if I can get a text box, yep. When we're looking at frequency, guys, a really simple way to understand it is to see how bunched up the waves are, okay? Or making it really sound a bit funny now. Is it squishy? Is it squishy? Okay, so when you look at the brainwaves, like I'll show you guys what I mean. Generally, we say brainwaves like beta have high frequency, okay? They have high frequency because there's more brainwaves per second. You're fitting in or you're squashing in more brainwaves per second. And as you can see, it's more squashed up. If I just outline over that, it's really squashed up, okay? Compared to this, which has a little bit more gaps in between, it's not as squashed up, okay? So beta has a high frequency because there are more brainwaves per second, and you can see that there are more brainwaves per second because you've actually got the waves looking a little bit more bunched up or a little bit more squashed together, okay? That's what frequency is. Now, on the other hand, amplitude, and I have to go back now and open another text box. Amplitude simply talks about how tall is the wave, height-wise. Okay, so obviously when we look at these waves here, if I can get my little texter thing, when we look at these waves here, these are a lot taller, okay, in terms of the height. So if I draw a little arrow going from the top bit of the wave to the bottom, or the bottom one is all the way here, okay, the bottommost part of the wave is all the way here, and the topmost part of the wave is all the way here. It's pretty tall. Whereas if you look at a wave like alpha, it literally, the topmost part is like here, and then the bottommost part is like here. It's really short, okay? So generally, what we're talking about is amplitude is the height of the wave or how tall it is. So from the topmost point, the peak, to the bottommost point. And the frequency is how bunched up the waves are or how squashed together they look, okay? It is important for you to know the appearance of the waves. You won't have to draw the waves, but if you're given a wave pattern, you need to be able to think, okay, those ones are really bunched up together. They've got a high frequency, but they're also short. So that means that they're beta waves. Okay, so high frequency, low amplitude is our beta waves, for example, and low frequency, which means they're not bunched up together, and high amplitude, which means they're tall, is our delta waves. Okay, so you need to be able to understand the characteristics of brain waves like that. Okay, just use this understanding of the frequency, meaning how bunched up or squashed up the waves are together, and amplitude, meaning how tall are the waves height-wise. Okay, this is how I tried to remember it when I did this topic a million years ago. All right, so that's basically electrical activity of the brain. So these are the two main characteristics of brain waves. We're not going to ask you for anything else except frequency and amplitude. So you need to know these well. Okay, just to give you a really good summary and use our nice bunched up and height words or whatever, short, tall, to make it more simple. This is a table. So beta, again, associated, I'll give you a memory tip for remembering this as well, but just for now, beta is associated with being awake and alert. Okay, alpha is associated with daydreaming and the early stages of sleep, but I would say it's more accurate to say it's not really the early stages of sleep, but probably more accurate to say the first stages of drowsiness. This is the point where you're like, okay, I actually got to go to bed now, like I'm tired, okay? So the first stages of drowsiness there. Theta are your early stages of sleep. So you got your stage 1 and stage 2, and your delta is your deep sleep. So that's stages 3 and 4. Okay. With the frequency, like we looked at in the previous slide, the beta waves are high, which means that they've got lots of waves happening per second, or the waves are really bunched up. Alpha is also pretty high, whereas theta is medium, and delta, which was the last one we looked at, is quite low. Okay. They don't have many waves in one cycle. Now with the amplitude, remember the height of beta was quite short. So we say the amplitude was quite low, and in comparison or in contrast, the amplitude or the height of delta was quite high. It was very tall. So if we go back, if we go back to the previous slide just to have a look at that again, okay, you can basically confirm the characteristics of this image here, each of the brain waves, with the information given in the table here. Okay, so just keep going back and forth and understanding why, for example, beta has a high frequency or why delta has a high amplitude. You need to understand what that looks like and what frequency and amplitude mean. Okay, now we haven't learned about the stages of sleep yet, so don't stress. We're going to learn about this in chapter 9. The thing I don't like about chapter 8 and 9 is that a lot of topics of sleep come in chapter 8, even before we've learned them properly, but we will be learning about this sleep stages and stuff on Friday. Okay, this is from your book. Again, just showing you again the bunching up or the frequency of the waves. You can see again, beta waves are very bunched up. There's a lot of waves per second. Okay, waves per second means in 1 second on the EEG, how many brain waves can we see? That's what it means. Okay, so if 1 second ends here, you can see that there are 1, 2, 3, 4 brain waves, almost 5 brain waves per second that have come up on the EEG. Whereas if 1 second ends here for delta, same area around here, it's only kind of like 1 brain wave that's actually occurred. Okay, that means that beta has a higher frequency than delta. Okay, but if we're looking at height, these are pretty short. These have a low amplitude, so high frequency, low amplitude, whereas the amplitude or the height of the delta waves is quite high. So if we look at the highest point, which is that peak, and the lowest point, that is obviously taller than that. Okay, so we say this one has a low frequency, not as bunched up as the beta, but a high amplitude. So it's taller than the beta waves. Okay. And then the other two basically lie in between, but they're similar. Okay. So alpha waves are more similar to beta waves and theta waves are more similar to delta waves. And these are some examples of functions for which you would see these waves. So for example, if a person is just doing what they normally do, like reading something, working, studying, normal waking consciousness kind of things, we see beta waves. Alpha waves are when a person starts to reflect or to daydream or starts to relax or get drowsy. Theta waves are to do with the early stages of sleep, as well as when you're in deep meditation. And delta waves we see mainly in deep sleep that we go through each night, as well as if a person is in a coma, they also have delta waves there. Okay, so anyway, that's just from your book, the table there. Okay, so the memory tip. So that delta. So obviously, we can make this memory tip a bit relevant to today's world. Okay, so bat delta is beta, alpha, theta, delta. Now, why is it in that order? It's in this order because, as the name of the slide suggests, this is the memory tip for remembering how our brainwaves change as we move from a state of normal waking consciousness, where we are alert, awake, and aware, and just doing some work or studying or whatever, to a stage of deep sleep. Okay, which for most of us is the deepest stage is the main stage in which we'll experience delta every day, because not all of us we're not going to go into a coma every day, right? Some people do, but not everyone does. But everyone does go through deep sleep, okay, every night when they go to bed. So what we start off with is beta. So I'm gonna run through this like a little scenario, okay? So let's say, obviously we're not at school anymore. So let's say you're at home, you're studying for a SAC. Okay, when you're studying for a SAC, doing some practice questions, you got beta waves. Okay, beta waves means you've got a B for beta, B for busy brain. Your brain is busy, you're awake and you're alert. You're doing the SAC revision. Okay, so you're doing some practice SAC questions, for example. Alpha is when you start to get a little bit tired and drowsy and you're like, oh my God, like I've been working for a while, but you know, my eyes are starting to close by themselves now. And I'm just feeling really drowsy. And by this point, you think that you got to hit the bed. Okay, this is when alpha comes into play. And alpha, A for alpha, A4, you're almost asleep there. You're actually so drowsy that you just need to go and rest. Okay, so at this point, you've hit the bed. Okay. Now you're in bed for about 20, 30 minutes and you start to drift off into a sleep. So you're no longer awake, you're not on your phone, you're actually in bed and you're actually almost asleep, or you've just fallen asleep there, okay? If someone comes into your room and starts screaming, you can still wake up at this point, okay? So that's theta. Theta, again, T for theta, T for they've just fallen asleep, okay? Just. Now, after a few hours, or after about, we say usually about 90 minutes, the person then moves into deep sleep. And deep sleep is the type of sleep associated with our delta brainwaves. Okay, so delta brainwaves, D for delta, D for deep sleep. So this is the progression of brainwaves as we go from a state of normal waking consciousness, like this person in this scenario who was working on the practice set questions, to a state of deep sleep. That's the progression. That's what happens in your brain as you go through these different tasks there. Okay, so that's basically the formula there. And we use the memory tip BAT delta to remember this. It'll be even easier for you to remember this, because remember back in the early days of COVID, everyone thought BATs was what caused COVID, okay? And then delta, we know, is the main variant of COVID right now. So hopefully that memory tip is a little easier for you to remember compared to previous years, because you've got a lot to link it back to. Okay, so that's basically the progression. Now, why do you need to know the progression? In a scenario, if we say, okay, Layla is working on some practice set questions, she starts to feel sleepy and get a little bit drowsy, what type of brainwave activity will she now show? You need to be able to identify that because she's now getting sleepy after a state in which she was previously awake, she'll most likely be experiencing alpha, okay? If it says, okay, she's been sleeping for a while and there's been noise outside her room, but she's not really waking up, you could then say it's delta, okay? If she's still working on her practice set questions and she's emailing her teacher and she appears to be quite active and occupied and she's quite busy, you can then say, okay, that's beta, okay? So this is how you need to be able to link to the scenario there. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. And if it doesn't, just let me know and I'm happy to explain it again. Okay, guys, the last thing we're going through for this spread, and that'll finish up the content for us today, as well as finish up chapter 8, is the effect of two types of drugs on brainwave patterns. Now, obviously, from TV, from movies, from popular culture, we know that drugs affect your brain, okay? We know that when you take a drug, that it does mess up sometimes, or sometimes even stimulate or enhance brain activity. When it does that, it also changes the nature of the brainwave patterns in your brain. So if someone was to take like cocaine or ice or heroin or any of those drugs that we commonly, that people commonly know about, and we were to then hook them up to an EEG a few hours or a few minutes after they'd taken that drug, depending on which drug it is. Some drugs have an effect on the brain faster than others, okay? If we were to hook them up to an EEG, we would automatically see a different change or a difference in their brainwave patterns compared to their normal waking state or normal waking consciousness when they had not taken the drug, okay? There are two main types of drugs, or two main classes, we could say, of drugs that we should know about according to our study design. The first one is called stimulants. Now, can anyone in the chat box tell me, when you look at the word stimulants or think about the word stimulate, what does the word stimulate mean, or what does it mean to be a stimulant? When you're stimulating something, what does it mean? Or what does it mean you're doing? You don't have to think about it too technically, just the English word, the word by itself. Yeah, excellent. Yeah. So stimulate means to fire or to activate, to increase the activity of something, increase the likelihood of something happening. Excellent. Yeah, those are really good words. Remember, stimulate, guys, just means to activate, okay? It means to increase activity. It means to cause something to happen in a fast way. So when you take a drug that's a stimulant, it has a stimulant effect on the body in the sense that it activates your body. It activates your CNS, which is your central nervous system, and it activates your entire body as a whole, okay? Because obviously when you've activated your brain and your spinal cord, your body also has a follow-on effect from that. So when you take a stimulant drug like ice or ecstasy, okay, what happens with these drugs is that they actually lead to a lot of activity in the brain, Okay, they make the person very alert, very focused, and very active. Let's forget about the illegal or illicit drugs. Let's think about a drug as simple as caffeine, because we know caffeine is a drug. It can be addictive, okay, or even nicotine. You know, in the movies when people are stressed and then they're working on something and you see them just like puffing on a cigarette, there's a reason for that. It's because nicotine is actually a stimulant drug. It makes a person more alert, more focused, and more active. And that's because it causes that busy brain type of brainwave, which is the beta wave. Okay. When a person takes a stimulant drug like nicotine or caffeine, their brain becomes very active through increased production of beta waves. Remember, B for beta, B for busy. Okay, your brain becomes busy, it becomes active, it becomes alert, it becomes ready to do more work. Okay, which is why a lot of us consume caffeine. Okay, we have a coffee before a SAC, or we have a coffee if we're ready to do a big study session or something like that. Okay, similarly, your illicit drugs like ice as well as ecstasy have the same effect. So, you know, generally in movies and stuff, and in real life as well, obviously, when people take these drugs, you would see that they become very active. In fact, there's some crazy things that people do when they go on drugs like ice. They become extremely overstimulated and overactivated, and that can even lead to them being extremely violent, punching someone to the point of killing them. Okay, there have been reports on the news about people on ice who have done such crimes or who have done such things. So that's all because ecstasy, ice, caffeine, nicotine are stimulant drugs. Okay, that's why we've got the plus sign here. They add, they activate, they fire up, they increase activity for the brain. In contrast, depressants are, just like the word depress means to put something down, okay? Depressants are basically decreasing or causing a decline in your central nervous system and bodily activity. Okay, what that means is that when a person takes a depressant, they are going to feel relaxed, calm, and drowsy. Okay, so it's the complete opposite. Okay, whatever that is, it's the complete opposite of that. Why are they going to feel relaxed, calm, and drowsy? Because depressant drugs like alcohol, heroin, morphine, okay, codeine, all of these drugs, what they do is that they actually increase the brain waves in your brain that are associated with sleep, which are alpha. Remember, that's the brainwave associated with feeling drowsy, feeling like you got to go to bed. Theta is the brainwave associated with the early stages of sleep, and delta is D for delta, D for deep sleep. So when you take a depressant drug like alcohol or heroin or codeine or morphine, you might not even feel sleepy to begin with when you take that drug, but when you take that drug, you feel so relaxed, okay? And that's because those drugs actually lead to the production of brainwaves that are commonly associated with sleep, okay? So if a person can't relax, they usually take something like, you know, alcohol. And alcohol actually is actually inaccurately represented a lot in media, in TV shows and movies. A lot of the time you see on movies, like people that drink alcohol are like super hyperactive, like dancing on tables, jumping up and down. They're so like, if they're normally shy, they become very you know, very different and very hyperactive. But actually, alcohol is not a stimulant drug. Alcohol is a depressant drug, because even though that person might be dancing on tables for a few minutes and might be all happy and might be so different from themselves, from their usual selves, after a while, the effect wears off. And once the effect wears off, all they really want to do is sleep, or they just collapse on the floor and they're just like, they can't even talk, okay? That's called the slurred effect, the slurring effect of alcohol there. Okay, and that's why alcohol is a depressant drug. Codeine, so codeine and morphine are both examples of painkillers used in hospital and, you know, medical settings. People can get addicted to morphine because, again, morphine is the drug that they give people like after a surgery just to feel less pain. Okay, you can get addicted to that because everyone would love to have a situation where they never feel pain, or where they always have something that can get rid of the pain that they feel. And that's why people can also get what was I saying? That's why people can also get addicted to codeine. Okay, codeine is the active ingredient in a lot of your painkillers like Panadine. Okay, and codeine is actually a controlled substance. So codeine is actually an addictive substance by itself, but it can also be used to make other drugs like heroin, for example. Okay. Heroin, we know, is a drug that's injected. Okay. And a lot of the time, especially in like movies and TV shows, when they do accurately represent heroin, like a person injects themselves with heroin and then they seem to just be like, oh, like they're so relaxed. Okay. So heroin is one of those that is correctly portrayed in the media as a depressant drug. Okay. Making a person really relaxed and calm and drowsy. And just kind of like if they were stressed before and really active, now they're like totally calm and relaxed. Obviously, with many other detriments to their body and their life, but again, that's just the effect on brainwave patterns there. All right, so hopefully you guys know the difference between stimulants and depressants. As long as you know everything on this slide and you know at least one example for depressants, so one of the examples from here, and one example for stimulants, you should be all good. Okay. This is a mnemonic you can use to remember some of those examples. So some examples of depressants are benzodiazepines. Benzodiazepines are your antidepressants. Okay. Alcohol and THC. THC is the technical terminology for cannabis or marijuana. Okay. Stimulants, MDMA is the technical kind of term for ecstasy. Amphetamines, which is related to ice, and nicotine, which is the active drug in cigarettes or smokes. Okay, so that's basically the two types of drugs and their effect on brainwave patterns. Okay, that's it. So what do you guys, what questions do you guys have about this now so far? Are there any questions that we've got? So we've just covered two spreads today, 8C and 8D. Any questions? No? Okay, what we're going to do, guys, is we're just going to do a few practice questions. Yes, alcohol is a depressant. So like I said before, a lot of the times people are confused. Yeah, this is a common question as well, by the way. A lot of the time people are confused, like, wait, how is alcohol a depressant? Generally, people get so hyperactive and get so, get so energized after having alcohol. But that energy is not long-lived. It's not even long-lived to the extent that it causes a substantial change in brainwave patterns. So because alcohol leads more to alpha, theta, and delta brainwaves being produced, it is not a stimulant, it's actually a depressant. Okay, so that's basically what we're talking about when we're talking about that. All right, so what we're going to do, guys, is we're going to talk about, not talk about, so we're going to do some practice questions. So let me just share the other PowerPoint that we've got here. If I can get it up. Not too many, just a few, just to see how we're going. So, okay, the first question. So this is again related to the earlier stages or the earlier spreads. So Christina often listened to music while studying. As she was typing up her English essay, she was singing along to the music, but from time to time she had to stop singing and focus only on her work. As she worked, it is likely that Christina was. So I'll give you guys about a minute to think of what the answer could be. You can go back to your slides if you want. It doesn't have to be a closed book question. You can refer back to your notes there. Just choose the best answer. Alrighty, so let's have a look at the answer now. Oops. Okay, so the correct answer is B. Okay, when Christina sings along and types her essay, she's showing divided attention, but when she needs to focus on an important part of her essay, obviously that requires a little bit more mental effort on her part. So she's putting more attention into that, and now she can't multitask anymore. So now she's showing selective attention. So she's actually showing both selective and divided attention, and she's actually shifting between or switching between the two. It can't be the other answers because in this scenario, she's not daydreaming, so it can't be D. It can't be A because typing is not a controlled process for her, okay, because you can see she's obviously multitasking while she does it, so it's pretty easy for her to do. So that's why the correct answer is B there, okay? So we need to be able to understand what it looks like when a person is doing a task using selective attention, which is when they're only focusing on one thing, and what it looks like when they're doing a task that uses divided attention. That means that they can multitask. Okay, so for example, in the first line, when it says Christina often listened to music while studying, that means that her listening to music and her just generally studying or typing up the English essay are both tasks that use divided attention because she can do both of them at once, or she can multitask while doing them. Okay, so that's the basic idea then. Okay, the next question. So I'll give you guys again about 1 minute to answer this question and see how you go. Okay, so it says later Christina was lying on the floor watching TV, occasionally imagining herself as the lead actress in a TV program, seeing herself on the red carpet and accepting an Academy Award. In this instance, Christina was, so now you've got a few options there. So your answer should have been C. Okay, she was shifting between normal waking consciousness and an altered state of consciousness now. When we read this scenario, automatically you should have been able to identify that she was daydreaming, obviously, because she was thinking about something that wasn't real. She was imagining, in other words, and she was basically shifting from her work, which was her normal waking consciousness, to basically, imagining herself. So she's shifting from what she's doing, which is watching TV, and then she's obviously going into that state of altered state of consciousness when she daydreams. Okay, so that's why daydreaming is an altered state of consciousness, and that's why she's shifting between NWC and ASC there. Okay, the most correct answer is thus C. Okay, it can't be D because it's not really the best answer. She's not really showing any automatic processes here, as we can see. We don't really see her multitasking. She's just kind of watching TV by itself. So she's putting her main attention into what she's doing there. Okay, so that's why the best answer would be C there. Okay, hopefully you guys are okay with that. The next question is just one question. It says 6 to 8, but we're only doing question 6. So this is from a really old VCA sample exam, but still relevant for us to look at. So we'll have a look. So yeah, give that one a go as well. Okay, so the question says, Dr. Daydream believes that adolescents are more likely to have dreams about success on the sporting field at weekends rather than on other nights. He tells his participants to keep a dream diary for the month, recording all dreams, their duration, and their content. After this time, he collects the diaries and asks 2 assistants to score each night's dreams for percentage of sports success content. The dream diary. So the dream diary is very similar to a sleep diary that we just looked at today when we covered the ways we measure consciousness. So all of you should have got the answer A. Okay, we said that the sleep diary is a subjective method for reporting consciousness because it is a type of self-report. Okay, it's a type of self-report because it can be influenced by the individual. So in this scenario, even though the assistants are collecting those diaries and they're scoring each person's diary to see how much dreams about sports they had, people could have lied. People could have said that, oh yeah, they had a dream one night, but they never actually had a dream at all. They could have said their dream was about them winning, what is this about sports? Winning, I don't know, gold medal at the Olympics, but maybe they never had that dream at all, and that's just something they wish would happen, but it never actually happened. So that's why the correct answer is A. Okay, it's not an objective report because dream diaries, sleep diaries, self-reports are never objective in nature, or never completely objective at least. It's not an operationalized variable because this is not an experiment. Okay, there's not enough information here to give us that knowledge. It's not a Likert scale because we're not asking the participants on a scale of 1 to 10, how sure are you that you will have a dream about sporting success? Okay, so it's not a scale. So that's why the correct answer is A. Okay, so done with the MCQs. We'll do 2 of these kinds of questions about the characteristics or changes in psychological state. So give this one a go and see how you go. And I think you will have to refer back to your spread 8B for this question. So I'll probably put a timer on as well, and then I'll pause the recording so it doesn't go too long. I'll put a timer on for about, I think, 4 minutes because it's a 4-mark question. And yeah, so okay, 4 minutes starts now, and I'll just pause the timer as well. I'll just go back and quickly go through this answer again so it gets included in the recording. Okay, so yeah, with this question here that we just went through before, you get 4 marks for naming each of those characteristics or changes in psychological state, and then you get another 2 marks for linking it back to the scenario. So we say Hermione had a low level of self-control, so she has less control or less autonomy over her physical actions there while she's drunk. So we're linking that to the scenario. So she might not have been able to control herself from hurting someone. Okay. Secondly, she might have had cognitive distortion. So this means that obviously her memory might have been affected. And that's why she can't remember actually hurting someone. She had no recollection of that event. Okay. So that's because her memory consolidation or memory processes may have been affected to the point that the memory wasn't stored very strongly in her long-term memory there. Okay. So that is basically the kind of rundown of how you get the 4 marks for that question. Okay, so moving to the question that I just got you guys to do. So this question is talking about Phil. He was listening to his methods teacher explaining a problem. He then starts to do something where he starts to think about his 18th birthday. So kind of diverting away from the task, okay, which we should all have identified as daydreaming. And then Phil's friend suddenly nudges him, asks him why he's strangely smiling to himself, whether he understood the last part of the maths problem. Phil realized he couldn't understand it. So what is the state? So it's obviously daydreaming. So there are 2 possible answers here you could have included. You could have either talked about the fact that he's uncontrollably smiling to himself or strangely smiling, which is the emotional awareness side of things, or you could have talked about the fact that he couldn't recall the last part of the maths problem that his teacher had explained while he was daydreaming. So that's the increased cognitive distortions. So the first answer is in Phil's daydreaming state, he may have had lowered emotional awareness, meaning he's more likely to display rather than control or withhold particular emotions. And this is seen in him uncontrollably smiling to himself, okay, without realizing that other people could see that. Phil's daydreaming state, or this is another answer, Phil's daydreaming state could have caused him to experience more cognitive distortions. This means he might not have been able to have been able to think clearly or fully process that information of the last part of the maths problem that the teacher presented. So that led to there being a mental block or a cognitive block, which is why he couldn't explain the last part of the maths problem to his friend. Okay, so those are the two possible answers there that you could have included. And it's always about looking at the scenario, what the scenario is giving you, and then thinking about, okay, what options do you have in terms of the answers that you can write up there? So you get 1 mark for naming in blue, emotional awareness or cognitive distortions, and then you get 1 mark for linking that to Phil's daydreaming scenario, including the word daydreaming, because that's also a key word there. Okay, that's it for today. So hopefully that gives you an idea of the kind of questions that we normally would ask you in a SAC situation with reference to consciousness. There are obviously a lot more questions that we can ask, but I couldn't put them in today's PowerPoint because a lot of them are also mixed up with sleep, which we haven't covered yet. So once we finish covering sleep, we can look at a lot more questions that combine consciousness and sleep together, because then they'll make more sense to us and we can do them. All right, so that's it for today, guys. Now, if you've looked at the school box, I have put up a new due work there for 8C and 8D activities. Now, 8A and 8B, a lot of you have done that, but some of you haven't. Now, wait, let me just stop the recording first.